Hello and welcome to the A-Form Show. My name is Alan George.
And my name is Tisha Rao.
Each week, we sit across from thought leaders and change makers in the architecture and design space of the GCC.
We dive deep into their professional and personal experiences to find out what makes them really tick.
Our goal is to add value to your day and make you all much better architects and designers overall.
Finally, the views and opinions of the guests do not necessarily represent the A-Form Show.
Hello and welcome to the show. On today's episode, we are joined by Prabhanjan Kambadur of RSP. With over 20 years of experience under his belt, Prabhu brings a wealth of technical and creative knowledge in planning and delivering large-scale and complex projects across a variety of market sectors. His experience ranges from master planning of cities and town centers to establishing urban design guidelines for integrated developments, design of technology parks, and mixed-use developments across the Middle East and Asia. Prabhu joined RSP Architects in 2001 as a senior architect and has worked his way to becoming a director. In the process, he has managed to form and lead many diverse teams of planners and architects and engineers. He has been part of several award-winning projects in the region. We are obviously very excited to have him on the show today. We spoke to Prabhu a bit off-air, and I suspect that this one is going to require a bit of sitting down and relaxing because we're going to cover a lot of stuff which may not necessarily be architecture. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Prabhu.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks for having me on your show.
Awesome. And of course, we are joined by the lovely Tisha today.
Hi.
Hi, Tisha.
So I obviously did have a list of questions that I wanted to, go through with you. But with our conversation off air, I feel like I want to start there because that sounds really interesting. So for everyone tuning in, we were talking about how, of course, we live in, I don't want to say difficult times, but obviously it is difficult, but it's just different. Mm-hmm. It's something which most of us in our lifetimes have never dealt with, this whole COVID situation with it rising up last year. And then, we now have a vaccine but now there's other countries going under lockdown again in the second and third waves and things like that. So from a designer point of view, I think you touched upon a few interesting topics, which I would like to cover. So maybe start us off with this whole pandemic, what have been sort of the observations you've seen from a designer point of view? How is it impacting the way that you think about design?
Yeah, I think this pandemic has been a game changer, a sort of a point of inflection for all of us. Civilizations have always go through cycles. And for us, the development cycle, this crazy development cycle we're going through started somewhere in early 1900s. And since then, our world has seen pandemics, we have seen world wars, and every event like that on a global scale has brought about a drastic change in civilization, how we live, how we build, and the whole behavior. And that's where actually I would like to more discuss about is how human behavior shapes civilizations. And an event like the pandemic, where we are being forced to change our behavior in so many levels, is going to be a game changer. Is going to bring about a change in our lifestyle, how we live, how we work, how we entertain ourselves, and how we interact. And fundamentally, I feel that civilizations have grown because of social interactions. It starts at a village level. There is a family. There are two families. There are few families. Of course, they could have been content within their village, right, but they venture out because they want more social interaction. They meet with other villages, and then it goes into a town setup because, people want to get together in a larger setup. It becomes cities as we migrate from the villages. But the fundamental thread which ties together is people want to interact on a different level with different people. Right. It could be economic interaction. It could be social interaction. But the whole deal is how human behavior shaped a civilization till date.
Right.
In fact, we can call it before pandemic and after pandemic.
Yeah.
Right. We don't know when the after pandemic is going to happen. Mm-hmm. It could be a few years down the line, but the transformation has already started. And being human, we always have this attachment to what we have. We're still not ready to give up our old ways of thinking and behavior. But something tells me this time it can't be business as usual.
Right.
I think you touched upon an interesting observation, which is it being an inflection point, because I think there were so many factors. Again, from a designer point of view, we're always criticized for, buildings having really high carbon emissions and, just the construction industry being so wasteful in the way that it is by nature and so on. So I feel like the water was bubbling. I feel like the pandemic might just be, what kind of set everything over. So maybe then from your point of view, what do you think it should be? What do you think should change? What are you sort of looking for? I mean, is this kind of like briefs changing, clients' mentalities changing? What exactly is the positive change that you're hoping to get?
So I think there are a lot of aspects which we can discuss, but I think let's go back to where does our clients, which is the real estate, the guys who lead real estate developments, where does their thought process come from for any development project? It comes from the demand. And the demand is coming from how people perceive, how they expect themselves to live, to work, or to shop. And so that's changing. Let's take an example. Retail, like one of the questions we discussed was mixed use. Mixed use is a category. It has become a category in itself, like residential, offices, mixed use. But fundamentally, mixed use, I feel, is the most organic way of living, right? From the way we started in our villages and the towns and the development of civilization, the development of our cities. If you take, for example, the Bastakia, you walk down Bastakia, you can't tell which is a shop, which is a residence, which is an office. It's all mixed. And that's how evolution happens. It has to be organic. If you go to Singapore, there's this concept of shop house. So you have a shop below and the owner stays above. So he's living and working in the same premises. So as a shopper, you actually have the option of walking around and doing your shopping and quickly go back to your residence. And that brings in the comfort level that you're walking distance from your daily needs. Of course, now the mixed use in the case of Dubai or, for example, the mega cities is a lot more complex. You have a huge shopping mall, and then attached to that might be some residences. It could be some offices, some hotels, but it's quite dense. Now, the question of densification is coming in. Do we need this kind of dense developments anymore going forward? I'll tell you for a fact what's happening in a lot of cities around the world. With this new technology that has come in, you really don't have to be physically present in the offices where you work. You can actually take your work home. You can work from home. So in a lot of cities, people are actually moving to the suburbs. They're not living in the heart of the city anymore. So once you move to the suburb, you would expect that all the necessities you want can be around that. So what I'm trying to say is this whole premise that people have all going to come together to one point in a very dense mixed-use project is going to break away. It has to be a lot more smaller satellite mixed-use developments where you have, it's quite self-sufficient, pretty much like the village. So I see a progression going back in a certain way.
Right.
The cities have to break up and it has to go into smaller cities outside, smaller towns outside. People want to live away from dense mixed-use developments and go back to nature, live with the nature, go away from the cities. And this is something which pandemic has already brought. Even Dubai, for example. Very interesting thing is, although in the past couple of years, we have seen a huge sort of rise in new supplies in the market in terms of apartments. The sales of those apartments is not actually very high, although they're happening. But what is quite surprising, and it's quite encouraging for us as architects, is the villa developments are selling like hotcakes. All the big developers in town, whether it is Emaar or Nakheel, Aldar in Abu Dhabi, most of their projects get sold out within the first 2 or 3 days. All the new villa developments. People are moving out of apartments, going into the villas on the outskirts of the city. And this is the same thought process. So fundamentally, the human behavior is changing. The mixed use or retail experiences have to change. The whole shopping experience has to change. It's no longer the mega malls where people walk. Of course, I must say that Dubai is defying the graph. If you go to the malls, they're actually packed on the weekends, especially on the festivals. But having said that, the tendency is less to go into the mall to buy something. The tendency is go into the mall to experience a lifestyle. And the buying actually started picking up online. You go and see what you want and go back and look at the best deal and buy online. That is a disruption that's already happened. So what is it that we're looking at is in terms of the human pattern and behavior, we are going to move away from this very, very rigid system of buildings which bring people together. It's going to be more decentralized. And even if there are mixed-use projects in the city, they're going to be more geared towards lifestyle rather than sales.
Okay. So, I mean, there are a few projects which I can already think of which are doing that at the moment. Sort of these smaller boutique developments rather than these large mega scale ones. But I'm interested, again, now to get your opinion on retail, because that's something which I've been thinking about quite often. Yes, like you rightly said, there's already been disruption in it. And I think the whole online e-commerce platform is something which a lot of retailers were already, if not embracing, were definitely going to embrace at some point. Most of them probably have because of the pandemic now. So in your opinion, do you think people actually still need a mall? Does there still need to be a physical space for it?
Actually, that is something we always used to wonder, especially with the latest developments that are coming. For example, this office we are sitting on the 35th floor of this tower. It has 6 lifts to get us here, and each one has 20 capacity, but now only 4 are allowed in the lift, or 5 at the max.
Yeah.
So when I come to work in the morning, the queues are quite long in the lobby. When I want to go to lunch, the queues are very long again. And same thing when I go back home in the evening. So that has got to change, which means that maybe going forward, I may not prefer working out of a tall tower. Maybe I will go for a walk-up office. Maybe it's a ground plus 1, ground plus 2 structure. Similarly with retail, I do need a place where I want to go with my family, and maybe I'll go to a restaurant. Maybe I'll even go and watch a show. Maybe it's a fountain. Maybe it is some sort of a laser show. Maybe it is some sort of a family entertainment center. I do need that. I think that necessity will remain. As a family, as a community, we need these spaces. But whether that space needs to take the form of the current malls which are in the market, I'm not sure. Of course, the current malls, they're doing well. They're existing. They do not only cater to the neighborhood, but they cater to the tourists who come in, because they actually display a different level of entertainment and lifestyle and shopping. The big brands are there. But on a day-to-day basis, if I'm a family man living on the suburbs, I don't want to drive all the way and go into a mall in the heart of the city. So I'll be looking at something closer to my house, maybe even walk up, maybe 5 minutes drive, where I can actually meet some of my neighbors or friends. For example, I'll tell you, when I drive down the Sheikh Zayed Road and sometimes the client says, hey, listen, instead of meeting in your office or mine, let's meet for a coffee. Where do we meet? And the best place I have met all my clients so far is Times Square. And that's because it's easy for me to get in, easy to get out. It's got fantastic parking, which is always available. It's not too crowded. It doesn't have the tourists. It's made for a day-to-day use. All the stores there are for daily use. It's affordable. There are plenty of coffee shops there. Plenty of space. Anytime you go, you can find a seat to sit. And it's easy for after I finish my meeting, if I have some time, I can go and do some shopping. There's a supermarket there. I can buy something on the way home. So on the weekends, I again sometimes bring my kids there because there is a adventure HQ. There's a rock climbing wall. There's obstacle course.
Yeah, I've actually done that. I don't know how kids do it, but listeners, if you guys have not seen this, Google it right now. It looks like it's not scary, but when you're actually up there,
it is quite scary.
I was like, I cannot do this.
Oh, you did that? Okay.
Yeah.
It is quite scary, but sorry, I digress. Yes, you were saying.
No, in fact, it's fun to stand and watch people do the obstacle course. And like you said, there are different kind of reactions, people using it. There's also a music school there. There is a yoga studio there. So for me, in a sense, Times Square, Oasis Center, smaller malls like this actually offer something for the whole family, which is not too crowded. Only thing which is missing, and of course, this is post-pandemic thought, is a lot more outdoor spaces.
Yeah.
Right.
And to that effect, although I must bring in the Nakheel Mall and Palm Tower project, which we are finishing. Nakheel Mall finished last year. Palm Tower is going to finish this year. It's been relatively quite successful for a new mall in town. And when we were designing that mall, the whole thought process was, this is a mall on the Palm. And the irony is when you come to the Palm, you drive down, you actually actually don't see the shape of the palm. All you see is buildings on both sides of the street you're driving in. Except if you take the monorail and you go to the Atlantis, that's when you can see the fronts, you can see the villas, and you can see the resorts. So I think Nikhil had brought us in quite early in the process. They asked us to look at something where we can create a destination, not just for the tourists, but even for the community on the Palm and for the greater Dubai, where people can just come and relax. And then, of course, get a view of the Palm. So that's why what we did is, in fact, it could be one of the first malls in Dubai where the entire roof, which is usually dedicated for MEP and other services, we clear it out. We put all the services below in the basement or the mezzanines. The entire roofscape is full of restaurants, pavilions. It's an open plaza on the roof. You can just arrive on the monorail or the car park and you come up or down, come to the roof plaza. You get fantastic views of the sea. You get an outdoor experience. You get outdoor seating, F&B, and there are events happening there. Like last Christmas, there was an entire Christmas carnival that was happening on the roof.
Wow.
And the entire community was there. And then what we did is, and it's a typical mixed use. So we put a hotel tower next to it and a residential tower. So this is a 52-story tower. It's got St. Regis, which will open next month. And then it's got about 500 apartments. And what we created on the top is a view. So you come to the mall and you take a lift up go right to the top of the tower, and you actually can appreciate the Palm, the Dubai skyline. But this was, of course, the thought process we had 5 years before the pandemic. But going forward, something tells me the rooftop restaurants are going to do much better than the restaurants within the mall. Because I think the human behavior has changed. When I go to the restaurant, the minute I see there is a big crowd, like last evening with some friends, we were trying to go and have dinner. I must say, everywhere it was packed. And everywhere we drive, the minute we see that restaurant has got a crowd, we draw away. We don't want to venture in. Yeah. So we are trying to avoid a crowd. But we found a restaurant which was quite small, didn't have enough seating capacity inside, but it had a big outdoor terrace. And we felt that we could breathe easy. We could sit there, have a chat for a longer time. So I think the whole behavior has to change. I mean, it has changed. Even if I think, God willing, we'll conquer the pandemic maybe this year with the vaccinations coming in place. It's already looking up in US. UAE is doing much better. Israel is doing much better because of vaccines. And even if things get better, which I'm hoping very soon, the behavior will not change. I think the whole idea of moving away from a very crowded place is going to stay, because this has now been ingrained in us. Just like touching surfaces or using sanitizers, people are going to get more careful. Of course, I'm not talking about those people who are quite paranoid about it.
Yeah, they're sort of in a category of their own.
Yeah, exactly. So that will stay anytime, Yeah. But I think on a general level, people who are not too finicky also, they're quite careful. So this is going to inform the decisions of how we're going to design the malls going forward, how we're going to design even offices like what we discussed. It can't be stuffed high rise with just packed. On the Sheikh Zayed, when you drive, there's so many ground plus 2 buildings which has come up on the left, small office buildings, which to me is a lot more attractive. I can just park my car and walk up.
Yep. So I do have one question which is very off topic, but the only reason I want to ask you is because I have been involved in a few mall designs, and you mentioned something about the Nikhil Mall, and I really want to know how that happened. So again, this is for the technical geeks listening in. If all your MEP is going in your basement, I know that I've had massive issues in terms of clear heights for parkings and ducts being massively oversized because they're exhaust and so on. So can you maybe tell us, if you can, how that entire system just worked? I mean, just a very high level sort of.
Sure. Nikhil Mall is, I would say, for me personally, one of the most complex projects I have worked on. And we couldn't have done it without BIM. And that again is going back to one of your questions about what processes will change the future. And that is BIM, one of them. The other one, of course, is prefabricated manufacturing, and all will come to that. But without BIM, we couldn't have solved a project as complex as Nikhil Mall. Now, Nikhil Mall has got a history. I've been in Dubai for 15 years. That was the first project I started working on, that particular project, that particular site.
Wow.
Okay. And in 15 years, that project has undergone 3 different designs because of various changes in the market. So 2008, 2009, there was this market change, and then our client actually put a pause on the project. We had finished piling. We had dug 4 levels of basement in the heart of the Palm. And the irony is, of course, we first fill the sand in and then we dig the sand out, right? We put a diaphragm wall around it and we dig it. And we finished piling. And then, of course, 2008, 2009 happened and then it was stalled. And very quickly, our client came back in 2010 and said, okay, we would like you to start looking at it again. The requirement has changed. The earlier design, 2 designs I had worked on had a Cirque du Soleil theater.
Oh, that's cool.
In fact, we were in very advanced stages of working with CDS and out of Canada. They were in fact testing out some of the shows. It was going to be pretty similar to what La Pearl and I haven't seen that, but I heard they have some water element. But this one had an element where, because this is in Dubai, they wanted to bring a transformation of a desert into oasis. So the beginning of the show, it is a desert. The stage is all desert, and then suddenly the stage actually goes down and the water comes up.
Wow!
And becomes oasis. And then there are these gymnasts who are jumping into water and diving into pool. So we had a pool right in the heart of the stage. And
again, like the technical side of me is like, oh my God, clear heights. Oh, that's a lot of big, massive water tanks.
That's right. It was, I'm digressing here, but since we are discussing about that, it was quite interesting because we had to look at tunnels. Apparently these shows have guys with scuba diving equipment inside the pool who are actually guiding these gymnasts. They are with oxygen tanks and all that. So there are hidden tunnels inside the pools where these guys are making sure the gymnasts who are either coming out of the pool or jumping into the pool don't drown.
Right.
So we had this very, very complex design. And then we had, of course, a huge mall with 2 very tall towers for residences and all that. So that was before. And then, of course, we were brought in back to redesign it. And the brief was, of course, okay, the market has changed. And this is one of those events where the demand has changed.
Right.
It's not a mega mall. Cirque du Soleil, maybe we'll skip that. Maybe we can put it somewhere else.
As its own like standalone thing. Yeah.
We don't have to make it. And of course, it made a life a lot easier for us, but it still remains quite a complex project because if you actually look at the Palm, the entire master plan of the Palm, the Nakheel Mall sits on a sort of a roundabout. You can go all around it, except for, of course, one side.
True.
The strange thing was that some of the highways which actually take you to Atlantis and bring you back from Atlantis were part of the plot of the mall. So till the mall opened a year back, those highways and tunnels never opened. It's only now if you drive, you actually can access those tunnels because they're part of our project.
Right.
And we dug up these and it was 4 levels of basement. And then we started designing it. And then we realized that you can't get away from the fact that you have to fill up 4 levels of basement. Yeah. So we had that parking. We have parking for more than 4,000 cars. We reduced the requirement and we put in 1 tower only at one corner, which has got the hotel and service apartments. And the most challenging thing, apart from the fact that there are highway tunnels which actually go through, which has to be coordinated and incorporated within our basement access strategy, we have a live monorail right in the middle with the station. So it's just not the designing aspect because we need to make sure that all the systems are coordinated between the monorail, the fire systems, the access systems, where you exit and enter the station. And of course, structurally it's independent. We have expansion joints separating it. But the whole idea was that while the monorail was live, we had to build all around it. That made it even more complex.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, whether it was after, before, or during. Okay, so that makes sense.
Because what happened is the monorail had its own timeline, and they had to finish it. And because 2008, the project stopped, the monorail went ahead, they finished it, and it was standing tall. The columns were standing in this 4 levels of basement. The construction was quite a challenge. Of course, the contractor did a good job. We had some auditors out of Europe checking for safety. It was done. So that's another level of complexity added. Apart from the fact that it's in a roundabout, which makes it extremely difficult for you to plan what is a front, what is a back.
Right.
The entry points everywhere, the exit points everywhere. For a mall, it's always good to have a front and a back. Because back is where you bring in your back of house, you have the loading, you have the trucks. But in a situation like this, where do you put it? Then we had to take all the back of house loading into the basement.
Right.
And that required a higher level of basement. So you need at least 6 meters because you need at least 4.5 meter clear.
Correct.
So that was another challenge that brought in. The other thing is in malls, if you actually have experienced, and many of us in Dubai have experienced, you would go to the mall, just like I mentioned about Times Square, you would go to the mall, which is easy for you to access and
100%.
exit.
Yeah.
Not just that. You would go to a mall where you can find your car after you finish your shopping. If you go to a mall where the parking is complex and you can't find it after you finish, then I won't go back there.
Yeah.
And some of the malls, I won't name it, but I have had an experience where I went there on the inauguration day. A lot of people drove in there, parked their car, and they got lost. They couldn't find their car. Then they said, okay, they send the family back home in taxi while they find the car.
No way.
Oh, no.
How Dubai, isn't it? How Dubai.
So that again brings in, if you go back to the thread we were talking about, is accessibility, ease of access for any of these facilities key. And that is tied back to the human behavior. The earlier part where I had a shop down the street, I could just walk up. But now it's pretty complex because I'm arriving in a car which has got its own setup which comes with it in terms of the lanes, the ramps, the distribution, the barriers, getting in and out. Then we had to color code the car park and the numbering and all those complexities will come with 4 levels of basement. Ideally, a shopping mall should have on grade, or I would say a multi-level car park, because it's easy for you to then access a different level straight into the mall, which happens in Dubai Mall, for example. In fact, after this, Nikhil asked us to design another mall in Dera, which is called Dera Mall, which is currently it's going a bit slow, but the structure is finished. It's the size of Dubai Mall. It's on the Dera Island. Okay. 1 million square meters. Structures all up.
Wow.
And I think they're just waiting for markets to revive and change before they actually go and fit it out. But in that mall, we took the lessons learned. We don't have any basements. The advantage is not just in terms of access, but in terms of pure business sense. You don't want to sink in 1 billion dirhams in your basement before you even start seeing the actual building come up. And what happens if things have to change, if your strategy changes tomorrow?
Exactly.
So these are independent structures. You go and park very easy. You remember the car park you are in, and straight away, whichever level you're in, you walk into the mall. And what it also does is, going back to the shopping mall design, we have the holy grail of the racetrack.
Yes.
Going around the mall. But how do you feed people and footfall into it? And the parking helps. And that's what is happening in Dubai Mall. You park and the entry point becomes the footfall. And all the shops want to be there where people are actually entering the mall from this. It also avoids this problem of dead zones.
Right.
So that's what we did in Dera Mall. But of course, in Nakheel Mall, we had this 4 levels of basement. The circulation is vertical. So that is one complexity. The other one, of course, is how do you ventilate 4 levels of basement?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Especially summers, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, and these basements are huge.
Yeah.
And, we actually, of course, now the regulations have changed. DCD requires all the basements to have ducted ventilation systems. But at that time, they allowed us to use jet fans.
Yeah.
But even with jet fans in place, you still need to have extractions on the end where you bring in the fresh air and you extract. How do you tuck it into a mall of this size where they don't go and encroach on your facades? That is one challenge we had. Then, of course, the challenge we spoke about is, how do you avoid having services on the roof? So how did we solve it? Going back to the entire structure, what we found is there is an opportunity in the complexity. And the opportunity is we have these series of ramps which are going into the basement. And the ramps, which are
normally dead spaces.
Dead spaces, and they actually can act as plenums for us to bring in air or release air. So you're not throwing air at the street level where people are walking.
Yeah. And not having like a big gush of wind.
A gush of wind, exactly. Yeah. So what we did is a lot of these ramps which are going to the basement becomes plenums for us. So we did very complex modeling, CFD modelings, to see how we balance out the air, which way the air can come in and which way it can exit at all 4 levels. That was one solution. We also used the monorail station. The monorail station, actually, the usable part of the station, interestingly, is only the top platform level and the exit level, which is 1 level below. But on the lower levels, the station is only a structure of columns and beams. And that was a huge plenum, a huge opportunity we found. So the footprint of the monorail station itself became a plenum for us, for us to use that as a ventilation for the basements.
Wow.
So that was another thing we did. And that's why I must say that as a team at RSP, we're quite pleased with the final end product. You drive around, you will not see any exhaust, any intake sticking out of the mall. And you can drive around.
Exactly.
That's the dream.
That's amazing.
So that solved the basement issue. Going back to the MEP on the roof, this again, and I must say it is also Nakheel and managers at Nakheel we dealt with. They were quite sharp, and they actually pushed us in the direction. They said, "Listen, let's see how far you can avoid the MEP on the roof." And it was a teamwork, of course, but between RSP and WME, the engineers on the job, and of course the client team, I think we spent hours debating how we can move this equipment away from the roof. So, of course, what we have done the final solution is not all the services can go into the basement, because the basements are actually having its own issue in terms of the distance from the shopping levels. The easiest thing we thought was to create mezzanines. So what we did is the top level of the mall, we again increased the height, and we actually tucked in mezzanine levels over back of house areas of the mall, like, the back of house corridors.
Right.
Of course, we did take up some of the backside of the shops where they get little less than the desired height, but that's fine because it's at the back. They usually use it for the store.
Yeah.
So we converted those mezzanines into all the MEPs, all the AHUs, the fresh air intake equipment, everything went there. And what we did is we still need the ducts to go to the roof for either discharge or to take the fresh air in. So again, what we did, we didn't want too many of these ducts and pipes to go to the roof. So as far as possible, we took it horizontally, again, above the corridors and the malls, shops. And then very fine. What we did is the facade itself, we have used GRC pattern, the Mashrubia pattern. And if you notice carefully, some of the Mashrubia patterns are hollow. And that becomes the exhaust and intake grills on the side of the mall, which again, you don't see from the outside, but which transfers the air.
Right.
And the biggest challenge, of course, was there is a huge requirement for fire exhaust in case of fire. So that was huge ducts.
Yeah.
And I'm not kidding, but some of these ducts were like 5 meter wide and 2 meter deep.
Yeah.
And these could only work because we took it horizontally and hit it with our elevation treatment. The other smaller pipes, we could take it to the roof and again discharge not vertically up, but go to the roof restaurant and then discharge horizontally. The idea was the roofscape is so visible from not just the Palm Tower itself, but all the other developments all around. We wanted it to be green.
Right.
So actually, if you see the aerial view of the mall, you'll see it green because we actually put a green roof on top of it. It's not a natural green roof. It's synthetic, but still it's green. I mean, the plazas are there and we put in the trees, we put in shading structures. So it feels like a plaza where people can actually go and relax.
Like an elevated plaza.
Yeah,
exactly.
Above ground.
And we can actually see this being more used going forward, bring back to where we were, where you would prefer to go to shopping centers or retail experiences, which have a lot more outdoor. And that's where, places like La Mer will do very well. City Walk will do very well because they actually incorporate this element of outdoor, indoor. That's the way going forward.
Right.
Yeah.
But again, it may not be large. It has to be a smaller offering, maybe for the neighborhood.
Right.
And larger ones might still happen, but that's more maybe geared towards the tourists because nothing can take away from Dubai Mall experience, the fountain experience. So that will be there, but we don't need so many of them.
Right.
I think you touched upon multiple very interesting topics. I just want to quickly, since we're on the topic of complexity, especially in this particular project, do you think this could have been done without BIM?
Yes. So at RSP, we started implementing BIM thanks to our headquarters in Singapore. They actually are at front runners of implementation of BIM. In fact, RSP is on the panel of BCA, the authority in Singapore, who advise on the latest BIM technology which has to be implemented, the norms. And that's how we actually took on BIM here more than 6 or 7 years back, even before anyone in the market started using it. It was very capital intense for us initially because with BIM comes its own requirements in terms of software, hardware, training people up.
A lot of licenses.
Yeah.
A lot of licenses, a lot of technical people who know how to use BIM.
Right.
But I think very, very early on, we saw that this is going to be the future. And we actually started investing in this, and we actually reaped the benefits in Nakheel Mall, which was, I would say, one of the earliest large-scale project we did on BIM. The complexities that I just described, for example, how do you hide a plenum with the ramps which are so complex and make sure that it does exhaust the air the way it has to? And this can only be done if you actually model it in 3D. It can't be done if you do it on AutoCAD in a 2D situation. So we actually coordinated the MEP structure and architecture in the BIM environment, and we then passed it on to the CFD modelers who ran their airflow simulations, and it made life a lot more easier for us. Going forward, in fact, we are seeing that most of the developers in the market have realized the importance of BIM, not just in design, but during construction. We completed a few projects in the Expo site. And again, Expo very, very early on brought in the stringent BIM requirement, not just for design, but for construction. So they actually enforce that the contractors use the BIM model to do their shop drawings, to do their procurement.
That's nice.
And it has happened. It brings in a lot of savings in terms of procurement, in terms of coordination. It's not that you're waiting for things to get done at site to realize that things are not coordinated. Clash detections happen early on. Even for the contractor, it's very easy for him to plan things, how he phases the construction. And the third aspect is the facility management. So the life cycle of the project, once it's designed, it's constructed in BIM, but during the facility management stage, each of these things which we have been using, for example, I'll give an example. During the design, take a typical toilet, I specify the tap, and that gets tagged as a spec in my BIM, and that goes into construction. The contractor takes the BIM model and he clicks on that and he actually gets a spec of the tap. He goes into procurement. While he's procuring and installing, he's actually taking all the manufacturing details and incorporating it within the BIM model in terms of a tag. Right. So anytime a facility manager has to look at a tab and order another one, he clicks it, it's tagged.
It's all there.
Everything is there, and then he can order it. In fact, they are also talking about advanced systems where even the facility manager doesn't have to do it. The system will do it for yourself. Right. Since it detects that, okay, this is going wrong.
Yeah,
this wall is missing.
Something. Yeah.
Okay, immediately it places an order in a factory in Europe or China or wherever. Yeah. And, so everything is integrated. Mm-hmm. That's the future we're going towards. And I think BIM is going to transform our industry to a great extent, and it's the future.
Okay. In addition to BIM, since now we're on the topic of, things that are going to transform our industry that is architecture, design, construction, AEC generally. When you compare our industry to various other industries, for example, if you look at fintech, or if you look at pharma, or just generally any other industry, even aviation to an extent, there's been progressive improvements over time. I feel that with architecture, we still, even in this day and age, in a place like Dubai, most construction is typically, your column, slab, beam, concrete, cast inside, that kind of thing. It's very similar to how maybe we constructed maybe even 30, 40 years ago. There hasn't really been a lot of innovation in that sense. Yes, there is 3D printing, which is now coming up, no doubt, but it's still not really innovating year on year or, every, decade on decade and so on. So I kind of maybe want to know from you, why do you think that is? And if there is actually something changing, what do you think that is?
I think the transformation is happening. Like you said, it's quite slow. It's happening in pockets. I mentioned about prefabricated constructions, pre-fitted out units, which are just modular. One of the projects that we're quite proud of is in our Singapore office has done it at the Changi airport.
Right.
So we did a hotel where all we did was on the site is just a foundation and the core walls and the lifts in terms of the staircase. But then the rest of the structure was actually modules of prefabricated, pre-fitted out with complete finishes, fittings, everything, FF&E, shipped out of China. And these modules arrived, and the modules were sized so that it can sit on the back of a truck and brought to the site. And although, of course, the pre-planning production took a little bit more time, the actual assembly at site was 3 months. They actually assembled and opened a hotel in 3 months.
Wow.
And this is the future. This is the future.
That is insane.
it was plug and play.
Yeah.
So all we had was, the MEP plug points, and the modules itself are structural.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So they can sit on like a Lego. They can sit one on top of the other. This was actually, I think it's about 10 stories.
Wow.
It could sit on each other for 10 stories, and then you just plug in. The corridor is there, was cast beforehand, but the rooms itself come completely fitted out.
I actually do remember reading an article last year where China started using prefabricated modules to construct hospitals when they were facing the pandemic right in the middle of it. And
Yes.
it became quite a big case study, actually.
Yes, and they finish it in some 10 days or
10
15
days. Yeah. 10, 14 days is what it took. So, yeah.
Now, there's a reason. Of course, in the case of Changi Airport, the reason was they could not afford disruptions to the circulation of the airport, the arterial roads leading to the airport. So it helped. And in terms of course, in that project, in terms of cost, it was cost neutral. But I'm sure if you do it on a larger scale, there's definitely savings. But there's another reason why it is done, and that again takes it back to our central theme here, which is human behavior. Now, traditionally, construction industry happens to be labor intensive and also happens to be one of the major driver in employment. I mean, typically, if I'm not wrong, in any economy, construction accounts for at least 20 to 25% of the economy. And that much employment is being provided. Now, for whatever reason, in labor intense markets, for example, China or India, the transformation hasn't happened into any of these latest technologies so fast, also because there's enough labor, abundant labor available.
Right.
Skilled labor is available.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if I'm a contractor on the ground, I can just say, okay, I get me 100 people of laborers to cast my structure. And when it comes to finishes, okay, get me 50 skilled laborers to come and do it. But what happens in developed markets where the labors are quite expensive? And what happens in underdeveloped markets like Africa, where quality control is a big issue? I don't have skilled people on the ground. I can't fly them in. So what do? I minimize the interface of unskilled laborers in my project. And the only way to do it is I go prefab. So that is the future. It has to happen. In fact, a lot of clients are looking at it as definitely in terms of time, cost and quality, very productive. We have delivered 7 pavilions in Expo. These are we call it operation pavilions, which has got utilities and services for visitors to Expo.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these have been done as prefabricated steel structures. We did it with space makers. They are expert in this field of construction. And the whole process was in BIM. It was quite smooth, very fast. It's also very easy to dismantle it and reuse it. So this is the future, but it will take some time to transform. If you look at markets like Saudi, which are opening up, there's a huge drive there to progress in terms of construction. And they're also realizing that the best way to do is prefab. If they're going to do modular construction, if they're going to do mass housing,
Right.
That's the only way to go. You can't be actually having so many people on the site pouring concrete or laying off tiles or fixing fixtures. So that definitely is future. And this whole design process of having the design done in BIM and construction done in BIM and facility also life cycle management in BIM. If you integrate that with a prefabricated system, you have an ecosystem which is going to be efficient and fast.
Right.
And also a lot more sustainable because you avoid a lot of wastage.
Right.
So this is the technical aspect. But the other aspect I would like to actually drive about is we have to fundamentally rethink about sustainability and how we see buildings as pieces of attraction, or do we see buildings as living, breathing spaces which have huge effect on our planet? For example, you have to really seriously think, do we really need so much of glass in our buildings? Why do we do glass? Well, because the common perception is they look good, but it's not necessary that those buildings which don't have so much glass, they're also equally good,
Yeah.
So again, going back, this pandemic and this whole scenario, apart from the behavioral aspect, we have to look at how, as a civilization, we look at our planet, how we look at our growth and how we can think about everything, including aesthetics, to lead us towards a sustainable future.
Yeah.
Why did I have to wait till a guy like Musk comes in and says, okay, I can do an electric car cheap and produce it. And then, yes, I can put electric points everywhere. And even now they are saying it's only next year, they're going to do only 2% of global sales of cars is going to be electric. Even after all the technological developments. Solar power has got an amazing development in the past few years.
Mm-hmm.
It's very affordable. The energy produced is amazing. It can go on top of the buildings. In fact, we have been talking to some consultants who are talking about printing the solar panels on any surface you want.
Wow.
Wow.
So I can take a piece of stone and give it to him. He can print the solar
EV cells
on it. He can print it and give it back to you. You can clad it on the building.
Oh.
And it looks equally good, and it's more sustainable because it's producing energy. So the whole aspect is we had to move away from the fact that thinking that it's only a Ferrari I'm going to like. You can like a Tesla, or you can like a car which is more energy efficient. A hybrid car. To me personally, when I look at a hybrid car, I feel good. But a guy who roaring by in Ferrari, the thought process is okay. He's burning a lot of carbon here.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think anyone, listening to this podcast would kind of realize that as an architect, as a designer, you probably need to be thinking about many industries at the same time, right? Like you can't just be siloed in your, design studio thinking about, I'm just going to do, my scope limited to architecture. So I think the whole point of printing EV cells, I think that's pretty wild. I don't think I've ever heard of that one before. And generally, I think our industry is due for a change, and I think it is definitely coming. Like you said, maybe in the markets where labor is still a lot cheaper, maybe not as quickly as we would like, but definitely on the way. Prabhu, a lot to think about in this episode for sure. Definitely a lot of food for thought. Having said that, I want to, on behalf of the entire team here at the A-Form Show, thank you for coming on. It's because of people like you that this show exists, and we will definitely be in touch for having you on again. Thank you so much for coming on. Fellow A-Formers, thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for being part of our journey, and thank you for the immense support we've been receiving for our episodes. It has and continues to be a very bumpy road, but we wouldn't want it any other way. If you enjoyed this episode and it brought you value, please share this episode with anyone who may benefit from it. But of course, if you loved the episode, follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn, send us a little DM, and we may just send you a secret link to a secret episode which we've been working on. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. See you next time. Keep sketching.